Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, February 13th Project Jupyter IPython developers call. We are following an agenda on Dropbox paper, which I will put into the chat box in just a moment. I forgot to do that. We will go ahead and get started with updates on Notebook from, updates on Notebook from Thomas.
So the only thing that's in the agenda is machinery for running tests with Selenium. So the Phantom.js tests that we have kind of been problematic for quite some time. They're quite flaky because of JavaScript asynchronous things, so it means that they fail quite a lot. And I think we've actually set it up so that if they fail, it retries them up to 3 times and only tells us if they fail all 3 times. So it's not an ideal system, and we also it's kind of a fiddly to write new tests with it, so we're not very good at writing new tests. So I've put some machinery in place to use Selenium, which is a framework for driving a real browser from a program, and that can be from a Python program, so we don't have to write JavaScript for it. And the idea is that we can piece by piece transfer the Phantom.js tests over to Selenium, hopefully make them more useful and also free up some of the work that Kyle wanted to do on switching things to React, which is currently blocked by the Phantom test suite.
Mm-hmm. Would this same kind of machinery also be able to be used to do the Jupyter Markdown tests?
Possibly. I haven't been following that.
Well, it hasn't moved forward since basically this summer, but part of the reason that it hasn't moved forward is because we weren't sure about doing that offline. So I figured that people with more of the expertise in Selenium who are building this testing suite could weigh in on that.
So Selenium, it can do, its strength is doing things that require a browser. If there's stuff that can be tested in JavaScript without requiring a browser, then there's probably simpler, more efficient ways to do that.
But if we're wanting to test the DOM that is being rendered when you're running books and running the Markdown from Marked, then it sounds like you need a browser because it's not just pure JavaScript. So, all right, I'll look into it. Where should I look to get more information about this? Like, is there any, is all of the information in the PR?
I mean, the information on what I've been doing is all in that pull request. Selenium information is kind of spread over the web.
Yes, but I meant specifically about testing notebook-related functionality, since that's what we're going to be concerned with here. So we're good to go. Thank you. I'll look at the PR.
Okay, anything else on Notebook before we move on to Jupyter Lab?
Grant, you're muted.
Nothing else of great significance.
Okay. All right. So any updates on, who wants to give updates on Jupyter Lab?
I'm willing to share with Darian if Darian has, I don't know if you have anything else to add, or Tim, feel free, or Steve also. And then
no, I was just here to listen. So go ahead,
Jessica.
Yeah, I'll start. So we've been moving along on the blog post. We're finalizing some details on the demo with regards to what we want to show to people and how we want to answer some basic questions about, you know, how do things work, how does it relate to the notebook, things like that. We also wanted to look for images that feature the different renderers. So Jason's been thinking about that. I'll probably also be helping with that as well. Currently, I think we're thinking about looking at some sort of urban public data set that has both GeoJSON and some kind of data we can use with the grid viewer. And we'll probably be putting that upline. The demo has some PRs we're going through with updating the workspace, and we're in discussion. There's a PR on that with what we want to present to users first when they go to the demo on Binder. If Tim or Darian or Steve wants to jump in as well on anything else. Also, I'm presenting at Pi Caribbean on Saturday. So I have about 80 minutes to talk about Jupyter Lab, which will be the first time I think we're going to be probably doing this after the Medium post comes out. So that's exciting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jessica. Anything else on Jupyter Lab before we move on?
Nope, just pushing forward on beta 2 issues. This morning I was just trying to upgrade Xterm to 3.1, but there's still one remaining issue on that. Otherwise, just pressing ahead.
Okay, great. Do you want to talk about NB Convert?
Happily. So I talked with Thomas the other day, and we decided that we're going to be splitting up. So over a year ago, I built a prototype EPUB exporter. There were a number of additional issues that needed to be resolved that made it so that it wasn't ready for prime time, not like fully supported in the library. And we decided it made more sense to pull it out into its own external package so that people can access it in its buggy form without like having a buggy version in the core Jupyter project. That's largely what that is. And I've been just like cleaning up a lot of little things there. That's only real news though.
Okay, so updates on Jupyter Hub are next.
Yep. Yeah, we've been doing some work on availability and trying to do some work on the service side of keeping things going and monitoring and all these things that are involved in maintaining a service that people actually use, which is fun. Yeah, that's where a lot of our attention is right now. And there are a few performance PRs and new features scattered throughout the Jupyter Hub repos. In particular, there's a PR from some issues Berkeley ran into, a PR that there was an issue with Jupyter Hub starting up, taking a long time when you've got several thousand users, which Berkeley does, even if they're not running. And that now just takes a couple of seconds, which should make it a little bit easier to use Jupyter Hub with lots of people. That's about it.
Okay. All right, so it looks like back to M to talk about traitlets.
So talked with Min and Thomas this last weekend, a couple days, and one of the topics was the future for traitlets and what the plans are, because there's not been a release in almost a year, and there's a lot of features that are involved for changing things for the 5.0 version that sort of broke things. And it sounds like we just didn't really have a plan as a group for what we were doing there. And I wanted an idea in terms of like, what can we start talking about potentially trying to get a release out? What would that require? Reverting some of the changes that were made for 5.0 in order to make it a feasible thing? Would it, or can we figure out what all those buggy conditions are so that we could maybe resolve it? What is the relation to traitlets with IPy widgets now, and all of that. That's sort of where I was coming from there. Does anyone have any input?
Yes. I mean, we talked about this
Yes.
last week, but I think one of the challenges with tradelets is, it sits under everything. It's fairly fragile and has accumulated a lot of sharp corners. So it's tricky it's tricky to do anything significant in there.
Mhm.
But there's been some significant work, and that makes getting a release. There's lots of little nice clean up, fix a little bug things, but then there are these occasional refactors that make releasing it a lot more challenging.
Mhm. But in terms of our plan,
I think
do
we need
want to not release just indefinitely, or do we want to come up with a way to then resolve the big refactoring?
I think we need to dedicate a fair amount of resources if we want to be able to get a release. Or we can try to start, if there are a couple nice features, then we want to leave the big stuff incomplete. We can try to do a minor release backport branch like we've done for a couple other things. But I think it will take a fair amount of resources to finish some of the work there. In particular, some of the arg parse, the command line parsing stuff that's been improved, but needs some changes before it's acceptable. And then figuring out some of what to do in the base trailets with some of the things that are going on there.
I'll make notes about that. If you know off the top of your head where those issues are that describe the arg parse issues.
I think it's mainly there's a PR or two.
Okay, so I'll find those.
That's milestone 5.0.
Okay, I'll look at that. Thank you. That's it. I just wanted to start that conversation because it'd be nice if we knew what the future of that project was going to be over the next, say, a few months/year. Thanks, Min.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Em. So now we are getting close to the end of the agenda. This would be a good time to bring up anything that was missed from the agenda above, or anything in additional that you want to add or share with the community or anyone else on the call. It looks like, Thomas, you have some notes in there, but anyone else on the call, feel free to jump in after Thomas.
So there's a long-running thread on a Jupyter client pull request that we're trying to design some new APIs around launching and managing kernels, particularly with an eye to making it more practical to work with remote kernels, which at the moment is not very doable. And so we're kind of exploring use cases, and I'm hacking together sort of prototype solutions built on top of the API in that pull request. And I've just this afternoon been working on a Docker version that would start kernels inside Docker containers. So I'll post a link to that once that's in a working state. If you're interested in running kernels on a separate machine or in a separate container from the notebook server, then please have a look at that thread. I know it's quite a long thread now, but it's not something that I want to do much myself, so I have a bit of trouble kind of trying to design how it needs to work because I don't need it to work myself. And then kind of coming out of the work I've been doing on that, I'm starting to think and there's no link for this yet. This is just making people aware. I'm starting to think about defining a new kind of protocol for launching kernels. In particular, I'd like to make it so that kernels can pick their own random ports rather than the thing we have at the moment is that the front end picks the ports, picks ports that are unused, then releases those ports and tells the kernel to start using those ports. And that has a kind of recurring problem where if you're unlucky, something jumps in before the kernel binds them and claims the ports, and then the kernel can't claim the ports that it's told to. So yeah, at some point I want to try to push a solution where the kernel picks its own ports and then tells the front end how to connect to it to avoid that issue.
So on the remote kernel part, so I think Dave Hirschfeld chimed in about Interact has started to support it, but not exactly on purpose. It was mostly just so that we could get the web APIs working for web versions of Interact, which is what resulted in like Play and a couple other things. But now we're in a state where we can have multiple hosts within a single page app, but then we just treat it like we just use the Jupyter Notebook APIs underneath that, just as is. So most of the discovery mechanism is more like configuration for like what's the URL for the Jupyter Hub server, and then what's the token. When I say URL, I mean including the username. So it's just kind of like the base URL, which also applies to just a general notebook server if it has the full URL. But that may be more of a simplification for people compared to, I guess, in what you're working on is more for like the classic notebook, like how you'd show those up as other kernels.
Yeah, how you could configure it so it could start a kernel remotely on another machine or start a kernel inside a Docker container or something like that, and what level. The thing I'm kind of trying to deal with at the moment is what level of automatic discovery is necessary for that. So the prototypes that I'm building are very much sort of, you configure it with a list of, I want it to be able to start a kernel called foo by SSHing to that system and running that kernel on it. It doesn't like the things that I've built at the moment don't do any kind of auto discovering either systems that can run kernels or kernels that those systems can run. So yeah, just working out whether that's sufficient for kind of the design of these APIs, or whether we need to build more automatic discovery into Jupyter Client itself.
Can you explain a little bit the advantages that you're seeing above? So right now, the Play app, for example, is talking to Binder to get its kernel, which is running a notebook server and using the APIs there. So the idea that you're putting out there is a completely headless kernel, like if you're SSHing in and just trying to talk to it directly. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be a system that is running the kernel and just
this kernel. Sorry,
just the kernel, and potentially once we've developed these things, the kernel nanny, the fabled beast that has been on the burner for goodness knows how long, and sometimes wish it would just burn. Which is the process that would, among other things, be responsible for delivering Unix signals to the kernel, because that has to be sent from a process on the same machine. So it would be a second process on the same system as the kernel that can receive a message and interact with it like that. Yeah, I mean, one other option for this is to use something like Kernel Gateway to expose kernels on a remote system. But still, I mean, similar questions of discovery and things come up.
So I think there's a good justification for like the SSH based, where you have to deal with firewalls. Like in most cases, I'm only going to use ones that I'm exposed a REST endpoint, which means I'm just going to run a notebook server wherever I need like one to be pulled from. But I know in the past having one that was SSH based is good. So the way that I do discovery for the web ones is to basically have the users configure what Jupyter hubs they can connect to, and then that's what we show. And so it's like there's basically JSON configuration file on disk that points to stuff, but it doesn't do anything for that like discovery of the SSH based ones. So we'd have to have some common spec for, this is the kind where you have to SSH and then launch the process, and we're going to connect to it via SSH as the like tunnel.
Min, I see you unmuted. Did you? Oh, you're muted again. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's applications for both, for allowing web applications to get kernels from different sources and talking the kernel's web API with things like kernel gateway and the way DB lab works and stuff like that. But also just having your desktop Python server be able to talk directly to some provider, whether it's SSH or I think there's a case for both.
I'm going to ask a seemingly dumb question, but when you're talking about discovery for SSH-based kernels, clearly you would need some kind of credentials or authentication in order to get that to work. So what does discovery mean if you're not, you're like the list that you described? Sounds like someone discovering it by knowing about it separately and then putting it in that list. But what sort of other alternative could you have?
I mean, so if you've got your system set up for passwordless SSH, there could be something that's running in the background that will, SSH into some defined list of servers, for example, and discover what kernels those servers have available. I'm hoping that we can kind of get that we can get the version 1 of this API done without having to try to do this, because then that raises all kinds of things about, that process takes long enough that you don't want to do it while you're going, okay, what kernels can I start? So you have to do it at some point separately and cache the results, and then you have to deal with, when do you update the cache and all of this thing. So yeah, it's a can of worms that I'd rather not open if we can avoid it.
Yeah, I think the main question is, what are the hooks to allow people to define their own discovery? What are the hooks we need from the base implementation to make it so that someone like Thomas can write, I know how to start kernels with SSH. These are the ways I need to tell Jupyter that I understand this, and that kind of stuff, rather than defining the next layer of how I might find all my own SSH specific stuff.
Sounds good.
All right. So anything else that you want to share before we move on to events? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So a reminder on the JupyterCon call for proposals. Those are due March 6th. And we do have Jupyter Day Atlanta that got announced. So there's a call for proposals that is out for that also. Those are due February 16th in a couple of days. Looks like a couple of days left on the SciPy CFP also. If you guys have any additional calls for proposals that you've heard about or that you think would be of interest to the Jupyter community, please continue helping me to add those to this list. It looks like there are some new events and some new speaking announcements that are on this list for the conferences and workshops. Is there anything on the list that anyone wants to talk about or add to? Otherwise, I won't individually list all of them. Crickets. Okay, I'll take that as a no. So moving on to the final part of the agenda, were there any releases last week or any that you expect to happen this week? I didn't hear anyone talk about them during the agenda, but I do want to make sure that they're captured here if there were any. Still nothing. Okay. One last thing. So if there are any action items that you would like to share with the community or anything that you want to ask people to take a look at, there is a section in the agenda for that. It looks like there was, is it okay to take the item that's in there right now for the discussion of the binder tutorial at SciPy off of there?
That's still ongoing.
Open
yeah.
discussion. Okay. All right. So we'll leave that there, and I think close out the meeting unless there's anything else anyone wants to share at this point. Last chance. All right. Well, it was great to see everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and we'll sign off.